I had always thought of myself as an ordinary child, living in an ordinary family. I wasn't spoiled, but I wasn't treated unfairly either. At least, not before everything changed. Before my sister was born. That night I was jolted awake by frantic knocking on my door and Aunt Claire's panicked voice. I still remember her pale face as she said, "Ivy, you need to pack your things. Your mom is in the hospital." In my mind, hospitals meant accidents, pain, and all the terrible things children never want to think about. But the real horror wasn't the accident or even loss, it was what happened afterward. Rachel, my sister, was born nearly 2 months premature. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I understood it was serious because suddenly, everyone in the house focused entirely on that baby. The weeks that followed were a blur of long days spent at Aunt Claire's house, overhearing hushed conversations about Rachel's condition. I wasn't allowed to visit the hospital often. Only a few brief meetings with my mother, and each time she would only say one thing. "Be good, Ivy, Mommy is very busy." And so I learned how to become invisible. When Rachel was finally brought home, things became more suffocating than ever. The house we once lived in turned into a sterile fortress, where every trace of me slowly faded away. Hand sanitizers, disinfectant wipes, and antibacterial sprays appeared everywhere, to the point that I could smell rubbing alcohol even in my sleep. My mother became obsessed with keeping Rachel safe. She scrubbed every surface at least 3 times a day, monitored the nursery temperature by the hour, and washed her hands so often that her skin cracked. But what hurt me the most wasn't the strict rules or the excessive cleanliness. It was the fact that I no longer belonged in my own family. The slightest sign of illness, a sneeze, a minor cough, would immediately send me to Grandma's house. Or worse, I'd be kicked out of the room with my mother's wary eyes watching me like I was a walking threat. At first, I thought it was a blessing. Grandma Amelia was kind and always let me help her bake. There, I didn't have to whisper every word or tiptoe around like an intruder. But eventually I realized something painful. I wasn't sent away because my mother cared about me. I was sent away because I was a risk. I tried everything to win back my parents' attention, but to them, only Rachel mattered. The first time I earned straight A's, my mother barely glanced at my test before returning to her list of Rachel's medications. When I won first place in the school science fair with a renewable energy project, my father sighed and told me to store my display board in the garage. Rachel might be allergic to the dust from the cardboard. I never knew if that was true or just another excuse for them to dismiss me. But the hardest blow came when I was 12. For months I had practiced tirelessly for the school talent show, where I would perform a piano piece I had spent a whole year learning. I had dreamed of seeing my parents' proud faces in the audience, of hearing their applause when I finished. But on the day of my performance, Rachel developed a mild fever. 99 DFE. Just a common fever that any child would experience, and just like that, my parents stayed home with Rachel, while I stood on stage in a crowded yet utterly empty auditorium. No one was there for me. 2 weeks later, Rachel had a 15-minute flute recital, playing a simple piece that any child could learn in a few days. The entire family, including both sets of grandparents, attended. They clapped, cheered, and spoke of Rachel's natural talent as if she were a musical prodigy. That was the moment I understood. Nothing I did would ever make them see me. Nothing would ever change the fact that in this family, I was nothing compared to Rachel. Rachel quickly learned how to use that to her advantage. From a young age, she knew how to manipulate every situation to get what she wanted. A little fatigue meant skipping school, a slight headache let her lounge on the couch all day, and if she complained about difficult homework, our mother would call the teacher to ask for an extension. Meanwhile, I had to handle everything on my own. Rachel only needed to whine, and someone would fix things for her. I didn't hate Rachel, I just hated how my entire world was erased to make space for her. And so, I accepted that no one would ever care about me, that no matter what I did it would never be enough. But, I also learned something. If no one would cheer for me, I would applaud myself. If no one would help me succeed, I would carve my own path. I didn't know then that one day, quietly walking away from this family would be the best thing I ever did. Grandma Amelia was perhaps the only one in the family who truly saw me. Every time I was sent to her house for a minor cough or simply because my mother didn't want to take risks with Rachel, she never treated me like an inconvenience. Instead, she pulled me into her world, a world of shimmering rings, faded gemstone necklaces, and small wooden boxes filled with mysteries. "Do you know what this is, Ivy?" she asked one afternoon as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at an antique hairpin. I shook my head. "This is a Victorian-era piece, handmade. See these engravings? No machine could create such details. And do you see this mark?" She pointed to a tiny symbol near the clasp. "That's the jeweler's hallmark. Things like this are worth more than you might think." I stared at the item in my hands, feeling its weight, the smoothness of its cool metal. That was the moment I realized some things held more value than what the eye could see. The more time I spent at Grandma's house, the more I learned about antique jewelry. I learned how to recognize real gold by its weight, how to distinguish natural pearls from synthetic ones with just a glance, how to determine the rarity of a gemstone by the way it reflected light. I was fascinated. But when I returned home, none of that mattered. I grew up in indifference. If I earned the highest score in my class, it was just expected because I had nothing else to worry about. If Rachel got a C+, it was a full family event, complete with cake and praise for her endless effort. I started to understand that I couldn't wait for someone to recognize me, I had to do it myself. I buried myself in books, not just because I loved learning but because I knew it was my only ticket out of that house. I joined every club I could, the debate team, student council, the school newspaper. I worked part-time at a small cafe to save money. When it came time for the SATs, I didn't just score high, I scored a perfect 1600, an achievement fewer than 1% of students ever reach. I remember staring at my computer screen, unable to believe my eyes. I had done it! I ran downstairs, eager to share the news with my mom. "Mom, I got a perfect SAT score." She didn't take her eyes off Rachel, who was complaining about her difficult math homework. "That's nice, Ivy," she said dismissively. "But I'm busy helping Rachel. Go clean up the house for me." Rachel smirked. "Wow, someone thinks she's special." I swallowed the lump in my throat. That was the moment I realized that no matter how far I went, in their eyes, I would always be nothing more than a shadow behind my sister. I filled out my own scholarship applications, handled my own college paperwork, and figured everything out on my own. I earned a full-ride scholarship to the University of Michigan, covering tuition, housing, and books. When I announced it at dinner, my mother just sighed. "Michigan? That's so far, Rachel's going to miss you." Rachel didn't bother hiding her grin. "Great, when you leave I'm taking your room, I need more space for my TikTok videos." On move-in day, no one in my family came with me. Aunt Claire was the one who drove me, handing me a small envelope, saying it was something Grandma had set aside for me from her pension. I hugged her, unable to speak. I made a promise to myself. I would never come back empty-handed. 4 years later I stepped into the real world with a prestigious degree, and no one in my family even knew. I landed a job at a renowned auction house in Chicago, specializing in rare antique jewelry collections. The work wasn't glamorous at first. I spent hours cataloging what seemed like worthless trinkets, old wedding rings, broken necklaces, scratched-up watches. But then one day, I came across a brooch that had been dismissed as a fake. Something didn't sit right. I picked it up, felt its weight, examined the intricate engravings. It wasn't a cheap replica. I had learned this from Grandma Amelia. Quietly, I spent 2 days researching, checking the jeweler's mark, cross-referencing archives. I wasn't wrong. This was an antique piece worth tens of thousands of dollars. I took my findings to the auction director. He raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" I nodded and laid out all the evidence I had gathered. The brooch was relisted for auction. Its true value? $58,000. For the first time in my life, I was recognized. From then on, I was no longer just the new hire. I was given more significant pieces. Gained access to high-profile clients. I wasn't just existing. I was becoming an expert. My family still had no idea. And I liked it that way. After my first major success with the nearly $60,000 brooch, I steadily built my reputation in the world of jewelry authentication. No one saw me as just another nameless employee at the auction house anymore. My superiors assigned me to more valuable pieces. Clients trusted me. And my commissions kept growing. But there was one thing I quickly realized. Working for someone else had its limits. No matter how many six-figure or even million-dollar pieces I uncovered, I only received a fraction of the reward. I started thinking about something I had never dared to dream before, starting my own company. No one believed I could do it. Even I had my doubts at times. I withdrew all my savings, took out a small loan, and rented an old storage space on the second floor of a Chinese restaurant in a not-so-great part of Chicago. The smell of food clung to the walls, the Wi-Fi was unreliable, and every time someone ordered Kung Pao chicken, the entire room filled with the overpowering scent of chili peppers. But the most important thing was, it was mine. My first office consisted of nothing more than a folding table from Goodwill, an old chair I picked up off the street, which I of course cleaned thoroughly, and a small desk lamp. Every morning, I made myself a cup of coffee from a worn-out machine, and got to work as if I were running a high-end jewelry empire. I started by taking small contracts from local antique dealers. I offered lower rates than the big companies but ensured the highest quality service. Gradually, more clients came to me. I had a knack for spotting undervalued treasures. A seemingly worthless diamond ring, a vintage locket dismissed as cheap costume jewelry, but actually belonging to a 19th-century European aristocrat. Word spread. 6 months later, a turning point arrived. A private collector approached me to authenticate a family heirloom collection. I worked tirelessly for 2 weeks, analyzing every stone, every engraving. And then, I uncovered 2 extraordinarily rare pieces that had previously been misidentified as fakes. When the collection went to auction, it sold for over $900,000, earning me a 10% commission. That was $90,000. The largest sum I had ever seen in my life. I remember sitting silently in my tiny office, ink still smudged on my hands from my research notes, and breaking into tears, not because I was weak, but because, for the first time in my life, I knew I was on the right path. With that money, I rented a real office, one with functioning air conditioning, free from the lingering scent of food, and even a small showroom for clients. I hired my first employee, Jenny, a recent graduate in gemology. Jenny reminded me of my younger self, brilliant, passionate, yet underestimated because she was quiet. Within 2 years, my company was no longer just a small office. We expanded to New York, then Miami. I started working with major auction houses, wealthy collectors, and elite families looking to appraise their inherited jewelry. And the funniest part? My family had no idea. They still thought I worked at some little antique shop. Every time I came home for dinner, I played the role of ordinary Ivy, the girl with a small job at a dusty old jewelry store. "You're still at the same place?" my mother asked while setting a roasted chicken on the table. "Yeah, still the same," I replied. She nodded approvingly, as if I were still the same unremarkable child I had always been to her. Rachel rolled her eyes. "God, you should really get a real job." I smiled and said nothing. That morning I had closed a $500,000 authentication deal. But Rachel still thought I was a failure. Then one day, Aunt Claire called me, her voice filled with worry. "Ivy, your parents are in financial trouble. They might lose the house if they don't pay off their debt soon." Despite being treated like an invisible presence my entire childhood, I couldn't ignore it. That house was where I had grown up, where I had cried alone every time I was forgotten. So I decided to send $7,000 a month into their account as an anonymous contribution. I never told them it was from me. And then one night, During dinner, my mother said, "Rachel, you are such a wonderful daughter. Thanks to you, we didn't have to sell the house." I nearly dropped my glass. Rachel shrugged smugly. "Yeah, I just wanted to help." I let out a quiet laugh. She was actually taking credit for the money I had sent. And that was the moment I realized something important. No matter what I did, in their eyes, I would never matter as much as Rachel. But that no longer hurt me. Because I had built an empire they knew nothing about. Thanksgiving was the day everything fell apart. I had expected this year's Thanksgiving dinner to be unpleasant. But I hadn't expected it to be the night everything shattered in the most dramatic way possible. My mother called 2 weeks before the dinner, her voice shakier than usual. "Ivy, I don't know what to do anymore. My back hurts so much. Cooking for the whole family is too much for me." I glanced at my work schedule. I had a major auction coming up right after Thanksgiving, but I knew that if I refused, I'd once again be labeled as the ungrateful daughter. "It's okay, Mom, I'll take care of the food." I hired one of the most upscale catering services in Chicago, the same company I used for corporate events. They delivered a Michelin star-worthy feast, from truffle-stuffed turkey to homemade cranberry sauce. The cost? More than 2 months of Rachel's salary. But I didn't care. I just wanted the night to go smoothly. Of course, with my family that was impossible. The moment the food was served, Rachel sneered. "You ordered takeout? Jesus, at least make a proper stuffing." I tightened my grip around my wineglass, forcing down my anger. This was coming from someone who once managed to burn instant ramen in the microwave. My mother quickly interjected, trying to smooth over the discomfort spreading across the room. "It's a little different from past years, but come on, at least we have a meal to enjoy." I said nothing. It wasn't worth arguing. The evening dragged on in forced politeness. Rachel droned on about her challenging marketing job, which mostly consisted of fetching coffee for her boss and adjusting PowerPoint slides. My mother nodded along in admiration, as if she had just won a Nobel Prize. And me? I simply smiled, knowing that just that morning I had signed a jewelry authentication contract worth nearly $500,000. After dinner, I slipped upstairs to my old room to check on an auction in Hong Kong. A rare Art Nouveau necklace was up for bidding, and one of my VIP clients wanted confirmation on its true value before placing an offer. I opened my laptop, scrolling through financial reports and trading accounts. I was so absorbed in my work that I didn't notice when the door swung open without a single knock. "Rachel, do you have a phone charger?" she asked, but her eyes were already locked onto my laptop screen. Before I could react, she lunged forward and snatched the laptop with a mischievous grin. "Let's see what you're up." She froze. On the screen was my bank account. A balance of over $12 million. I watched Rachel's face go pale, then immediately twist into something raw and greedy. "What the hell is this?" she stammered, eyes wide. "Whose money is this? Don't tell me you actually have this much." I sprang up, grabbing for my laptop, but it was too late. Rachel bolted downstairs, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Everyone, come look, Ivy's a millionaire." The room fell into a dead silence. Every pair of eyes turned to me. "Rachel, don't do this," I gritted my teeth. But she was already pointing at me like she had just uncovered a criminal. "She has over $12 million, while this whole family is struggling every single day." My mother dropped her fork, her face going pale before it flushed red with anger. You had that kind of money while your father and I were struggling?" Her voice shook. "While Rachel has student loan debt? While we've been scraping by to keep this house?" I stood frozen. No congratulations, no pride. Only outrage. My father stood up, his face like stone. "We raised you, you have an obligation to share with your family." Rachel, sensing the perfect opportunity, chimed in with a sweet fake pout. "I just need $2 million, she shrugged. "Not much. I just want a fresh start, a better life like you." My mother nodded in agreement. "That's right, Ivy, and your father and I have been thinking about a vacation home in Florida. Nothing too extravagant, just around $3 million. I let out a bitter laugh. So, now you all think I have a financial responsibility to this family? My father's tone turned firm. It's not a matter of thinking, daughter. It's your obligation. I set my wineglass down on the table, glancing around at the faces staring at me with hunger, like vultures circling their prey. I've been sending $7,000 a month into your account for the past 2 years, I said, my voice ice cold. I helped pay off this family's biggest debts. Silence. My mother's eyes widened. What did you just say? I laughed, but it looks like Rachel already took credit for that. Rachel froze. I saw a flicker of fear cross her face. My father clenched his fists, but I no longer cared. Slowly I stood up, grabbed my laptop, picked up my designer handbag, one my mother once assumed was a cheap knockoff, and walked straight to the door. Before leaving, I turned back and looked them in the eye. Not another cent, no more support. This family is no longer my responsibility. My mother looked shell-shocked, Rachel's mouth hung open in disbelief. I slammed the door behind me. For the first time in my life, I felt free. I walked away from Thanksgiving dinner with a mix of relief and bitterness. For the first time, I set a boundary. I was no longer the forgotten child in the corner, no longer a bystander in my own life. But I also knew they wouldn't let this go. And I was right. Less than an hour after leaving, my phone started buzzing non-stop. My mother, Rachel, my father, Aunt Claire's number. Even unfamiliar numbers, I guessed long-lost relatives suddenly remembered I existed. 7:42 p.m. How could you do this to your family? I raised you. 8:15 p.m. Let's be reasonable and talk like adults, family is important. 9:30 p.m. You have all that money, why are you being so selfish? Rachel needs your help. 11 p.m. I found a perfect house in Florida. It's only $3 million. I silenced my phone. But the messages kept pouring in. The final straw was Rachel's dramatic Facebook post, as if she were starring in a low-budget soap opera. My millionaire sister hid her fortune from the family for years, letting our parents struggle, letting me drown in student debt. No one can believe this betrayal. I have always supported her. And this is how she treats her family? Hundreds of likes, floods of comments from distant relatives. Unbelievable. Ivy was always the weird one. If I had that kind of money, I'd help my family instead of abandoning them. She's so ungrateful. I let out a cold laugh. Rachel, the girl who had never lifted a finger in her life, who had never earned a single dollar on her own, was now playing the victim. I didn't block them. I knew they wouldn't stop until they saw me in person. And just as I predicted, Monday morning, they showed up at my office. Jenny, my assistant, burst into my office, looking alarmed. Ivy, your mom, dad, and Rachel are at the front desk. They say they have an appointment. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I'm guessing they don't actually have one. Jenny swallowed. Not at all, they're arguing with security. I stood up and walked into the lobby. My father sat with his legs crossed, Rachel had her arms folded in smug defiance, and my mother's eyes glistened with calculated tears. Ivy, we need to talk, my father said in a low voice. There is nothing left to say, I cut in. I've made myself very clear. Rachel scoffed. You seriously think you can just refuse to help your family? You're living in luxury while we're struggling. I crossed my arms and looked her straight in the eye. Are you struggling? Because you seem pretty comfortable with that brand new Gucci bag. My mother immediately burst into tears. Ivy, you owe this family. We raised you. We sacrificed so much for you. Are you really going to abandon us? I looked at them, completely emotionless. I don't owe anyone anything. I built everything on my own. When I needed help, where were you? Nowhere. Rachel clenched her fists, her voice rising in anger. You're heartless. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and performed the simplest action of my life. I canceled every automatic payment I had been sending them. Right in front of their eyes. My mother shrieked as her phone dinged with the notification. You can't do this. I just did. My father's face turned red, his voice sharp with fury. You'll regret this, we're family. I nodded at security. Escort them out, and put their names on the do not enter list for this building. Rachel screamed, my mother collapsed into sobs, but I didn't care anymore. They were thrown out of my company, right in front of my employees and clients. And I felt absolutely no guilt. That night, I got a call. Grandma Amelia. Well done, Ivy. Her voice was filled with pride. I stayed silent. You're not mad at me? She chuckled. You're the first one in this family to stand on your own. I just wish I could have seen their faces when they got kicked out of your office. I laughed, for the first time in days, a real smile. Thank you, Grandma. You don't need to thank me, Ivy, you did the right thing. I gazed out the window of my high-rise apartment, the city lights twinkling in the distance. I had cut them off. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly free. The moment my office door slammed shut behind my family, a strange feeling settled in my chest. Not fear, not regret. Relief. I had severed the ties completely. No more pointless financial support, no more manipulative messages or desperate midnight calls. For the first time, I no longer had to carry the weight of people who didn't deserve it. But I also knew they wouldn't give up easily. Within a week I moved. My old apartment was too easy to find. I rented a penthouse in the most secure part of Chicago, with 24/7 security, and a strict guest registry. I changed my phone number, updated my company information, wiped all personal data from social media. My family had no way to contact me. Yet they still tried. My mother sent emails from a new address every single day, filled with manipulative subject lines. I'm very sick, do you really not care? Family is still family, Ivy, don't do this. You'll regret it if you let me die without saying goodbye. Rachel, on the other hand, took a different approach. She went public. On Facebook she wrote long-winded posts about her greedy millionaire sister abandoning her family in their time of need, inviting nosy relatives to swarm the comments. I can't believe Ivy could be this heartless. That girl was always strange, not surprising. Having money but refusing to help family? That's just awful. I just smirked. These people never cared about me when I had nothing, and now, suddenly, they had opinions? I didn't respond. Not a single reply, not a single explanation. The more furious they became, the quieter I stayed. And that drove them insane. Whether I liked it or not, the Thanksgiving incident spread further than I expected. One of my high-profile clients overheard the story at a party, and within days, the high-end jewelry business community started recognizing my name in a new way. The woman abandoned by her family for being too successful? The story gained traction, but instead of damaging my reputation, it made me a trusted name in jewelry authentication. Collectors flooded to my company, not just for my expertise, but because they admired how I defended my achievements. I expanded, opening 2 new offices, one in Los Angeles and one in Miami. Within a year, my company surpassed every competitor, becoming the leading name in luxury jewelry authentication. Meanwhile, Rachel was also trying to build her own career. One day, Jenny, my assistant, walked into my office, eyes wide as if she had just seen something unbelievable. Ivy, you're not going to believe this. I raised an eyebrow. What is it? Jenny placed an article in front of me about a new jewelry authentication business. The name? Rachel's Fine Jewels Authentication. I burst into laughter. Rachel, the person who couldn't tell cubic zirconia from a real diamond, was trying to open a jewelry authentication company? I clicked on her website. Less than 3 months after launching, Rachel's company was flooded with terrible reviews. They mislabeled my Cartier bracelet as a fake. Terrible service, the staff has no knowledge. This company is a complete joke. I wasn't surprised. Rachel had never taken anything seriously in her life, and this was no different. She thought that just by having the same last name as me, she could waltz into the luxury jewelry world? No, this industry wasn't for frauds. Even though everything was crystal clear, my family still wouldn't give up. Despite publicly claiming they didn't need me, that I didn't matter, I still heard rumors that they were desperately hoping I'd come back. Aunt Claire accidentally texted me. Your mom says they don't need your money, but honestly they're struggling. It wouldn't hurt if you helped. Of course. They didn't need my money. Until they were broke. Rachel was drowning in debt, my mother was clinging to appearances, and my father was scrambling to stay afloat. And I no longer cared. A year after cutting them off completely, I sat on my penthouse balcony, a glass of wine in hand, gazing at the dazzling Chicago skyline. I no longer feared my phone ringing. I no longer checked my email, dreading another money request. I no longer felt pressured to prove anything. I had won. But not in the way they thought. My real victory was freedom. Not the millions in my bank account. Not owning the most successful company in my industry. But the fact that no one could control me anymore. I was free in a way my family would never understand. And I never looked back. The lesson from Ivy's story isn't just about financial success, but more importantly, about reclaiming oneself. She refused to let her family's expectations and manipulations dictate her life. She set boundaries and protected her achievements. Sometimes, family isn't a source of support, it's a burden that needs to be left behind. True success isn't just about money, it's about the freedom to live life on your own terms, without being controlled by anyone. Ivy proved that sometimes, the best thing you can do is walk away, without looking back. What do you think about Ivy's story? Did she make the right choice by cutting off her family to protect herself, or was there another way to handle it? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more real, emotional stories about family. And I had lived for 35 years without ever thinking that a family dinner could shatter everything I had ever believed in. The flickering candles on the dining table, the soft glow from the vintage chandelier, and the rich aroma of stew filling the air. All of it was a perfectly orchestrated trap. And I walked right into it, without a single shred of suspicion. My mother had called 2 weeks ago, her voice sweeter than usual. Sophia, you should come home for dinner, it's been so long since the family gathered together. I hesitated. For over a decade I had grown accustomed to my parents' conditional affection. They only reached out when they needed something. But a part of me still wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. That they truly missed me. So, I drove from San Francisco to my childhood home in Sacramento, leaving behind my packed schedule and intense meetings. I arrived with hope, but just minutes after sitting down at the table, that hope shattered. Like a wine glass slipping from someone's hand and crashing onto the floor. To avoid any misunderstandings later, Mom and Dad want you to know now. Parker, my younger brother, spoke smoothly as if he had rehearsed it. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his face barely concealing his satisfaction. Next to him, Olivia, my younger sister, twirled a golden strand of hair around her finger, a smirk playing on her lips, as if she had just won a grand bet. I set my fork down, suddenly finding the stew my mother had so carefully prepared harder to swallow than ever. What? I asked, my voice dry, but I forced myself to stay calm. My mother, the one who had invited me home with the promise of a warm evening, sighed softly. Your father and I have finalized our will. This house, the lakefront villa in Tahoe, everything we own, will go to Parker and Olivia. Her words fell into the space between us like a knife slicing straight into my chest. I turned to my father, hoping, praying that he would refute this, that he would say it was just a cruel joke. But he only lowered his head, staring into his glass of wine, offering no disagreement. I took a deep breath, trying to find a thread of logic in this mess. And why? Parker shrugged, his voice laced with amusement. Because you don't need it, right? You have your own company, your own house, a stable life. Mom and Dad think Olivia and I need the support more. Support? I scoffed, my laughter hollow. What exactly do you mean by support? Olivia, you're 28 and haven't held a job for more than 6 months. Parker, how many times have you switched majors in college? 5? 6? And Mom and Dad have been paying for every single tuition fee. As I spoke, I felt my breath quicken, my heart pounding with fury. My mother crossed her arms, her gaze cold. Sophia, there's no need to overreact. Your father and I have thought this through. You don't need these assets. But Parker and Olivia need a solid foundation to build their lives on. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. A foundation? And what about the money I spent helping you pay off the mortgage? The times I covered the utility bills and home repairs? What about the $40,000 I invested to renovate the Tahoe villa? Does no one remember that? Olivia chuckled, her eyes full of mockery. Oh, so you're keeping tabs on every penny? That's disappointing, Sophia. You're rich, do you really need to be so stingy? I stared at her, unable to believe her audacity. Stingy? I emphasized each word. No, Olivia. This is called fraud. This is called exploitation. My mother slammed her hand on the table so hard that the glasses nearly toppled over. Enough, Sophia, stop acting like a victim. You always think about money. Always. We did this not because we don't love you, but because we love all of our children. Love. I felt a cold rage spreading through my chest. Parker leaned back, feigning sympathy. You're acting like a child who just had their favorite toy taken away. Everyone here is an adult, Sophia. You should learn to accept reality. I said nothing. His words didn't infuriate me anymore. They only made me realize one thing. I had been deceived my entire life. They had never truly seen me as part of the family. I wasn't their daughter. I was their financial provider. Slowly, I placed my hands on the table, gripping the edge of the tablecloth. I took a deep breath, letting the anger settle. When I looked up again, my gaze was ice cold. I understood now. They didn't need me, and I didn't need them. I had spent the last decade believing that family was a place of refuge, that no matter what happened, they would cherish me the way I cherished them. But the truth? I wasn't their daughter. I was an ATM. And now, that I was no longer useful, they were ready to discard me without a second thought. I stared at the faces in front of me. My mother, the one who called me every time a bill was due. My father, the man who never once opposed any of my mother's decisions, even when she treated me unfairly. Parker, the one who had burned through an endless amount of my money on courses he never completed. Olivia, the one who had never worked a serious job a single day in her life, yet had enough designer clothes to fill 3 rooms. I laughed, but not out of amusement. My voice dripped with bitterness. And what about the money I spent on all of you? Does no one think that deserves any recognition? My mother crossed her arms, her gaze sharp as a razor. Sophia, all you ever talk about is money. No amount is ever enough for you, is it? I felt my throat go dry. Never enough? I repeated, almost whispering. I've been paying the mortgage on this house for the past 6 years. I was the only one who stepped up to take on the loan when you were on the verge of bankruptcy. I also paid for the renovations on the Tahoe villa because you said you wanted to keep it as a family asset. And now, I'm not even considered part of this family. Olivia shrugged, raising an eyebrow with mock indifference. No one forced you, Sophia. You just like playing the hero. That sentence felt like a slap to my face. You're right, no one forced me. I met her green eyes, searching for even a trace of remorse, but finding only ridicule. I did it, because I thought family was supposed to support each other. But I was wrong. I was the only one making sacrifices, while the rest of you only knew how to take. Parker scoffed. You're acting just like a child who lost their favorite toy. I felt the rage building in my chest. A toy? I enunciated each word, feeling the heat rise to my face. I've spent nearly $500,000 helping this family over the past decade. I put my dreams on hold, passed up chances to travel, to buy a bigger home, to invest in my own future. All so that you wouldn't have to struggle. And now, you call me greedy just because I asked for a little fairness? My mother shook her head, sighing as if I were some pitiful fool who couldn't understand reason. Family is about love, Sophia, not money. I let out a hollow laugh. Love? I looked around the room. the house I had poured so much time and money into maintaining. If that were true, then why does love only seem to matter when it comes from me? Why am I always the one making sacrifices? No one answered. No one ever answered that question. A cold silence filled the room. I could see it in their eyes. They felt no guilt. They didn't think they had exploited me, they were just annoyed that I dared to demand fairness. A sharp pain clenched in my chest. Why had I ever thought they would change? I took a deep breath and stood up. The chair scraped against the hardwood floor, the screeching sound cutting through the tense air. "I've heard enough," I said coldly. "I'm done." My mother blinked. "What did you just say?" I met her gaze, my words slow and deliberate. "I'm done. I have no more obligations to any of you." Parker laughed, but there was something uneasy in his tone. "What? You're going to cut off the family just like that?" I stared at him, unblinking. "Yes. And you'll soon understand exactly what that means." I turned on my heel, not waiting for their reaction. My mother's voice rang out behind me, sharp and frantic. "Sophia, what the hell are you doing? Family is supposed to stick together. You can't just cut us off over a little disagreement." I paused, a smirk curling on my lips. But this time, it was ice cold. "A little disagreement?" I repeated, then turned back, my eyes like steel. "This isn't a little disagreement. This is betrayal." I walked swiftly toward the door, but before I crossed the threshold, my mother's voice rang out one last time, filled with anger and warning. "If you walk out that door, don't ever think about coming back." I didn't stop. I didn't need to go back. I had all the answers I needed. Driving back to San Francisco, I felt my chest tighten, as if a boulder was pressing down on me. My mind spun with the bitter words from dinner, the disdainful looks from Olivia, Parker's smug smirk, and the suffocating silence of my parents. The buildings blurred past my car window, the streetlights stretching endlessly along the boulevard like hollow streaks of light. I used to call that house my family, but now, it was nothing more than a black hole that had swallowed every ounce of my effort and love. When I got back to my apartment, I tossed my bag onto the couch, poured myself a glass of wine, and sank into the sofa. A long sigh escaped my lips. I didn't even have the energy to be angry anymore. Only exhaustion and weariness remained. Then, I opened my banking app. $2,100 per month. That was how much I had been paying for them all these years. $1,500 for the mortgage. $600 for utilities. Electricity, water, internet, maintenance. Not to mention all the extra expenses, Parker's tuition, the expensive gifts my mother suggested during the holidays, the vacations they invited me on, only for me to end up paying for everything. A wave of betrayal surged through me, burning hot and thick in my throat. I had poured everything into this family like a fool, while to them, I was nothing more than a walking wallet. I tapped the Cancel Recurring Payments button. The screen flashed, confirming the cancellation. I stared at the words, "successfully cancelled," and an unfamiliar sense of relief washed over me. It felt as if I had just severed an invisible chain that had bound me for years. But I knew they wouldn't let this go easily. The first call came the next morning. My mother's number, I ignored it. The second call. The third. The fourth. She didn't give up. By the fifth, I silenced my phone and let it go to voicemail. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and checked my messages. "Mom, Sophia, I can't believe you did this. Do you have any idea how much the house is struggling?" "Mom, don't be so selfish. Family is supposed to help each other." "Mom, call me back." I set my cup down, closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I figured she had found out by now. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my father. I stared at the screen, feeling my heart sink. If it had been in the past, I would have answered immediately, but now? I knew he wasn't calling to defend me. I let it go to voicemail. A while later, I played the message. Dad, Sophia. You need to reconsider. Your mother is very upset. You can't just cut ties over a small misunderstanding. We're family. I let out a hollow laugh. Family? If I was really family, why hadn't they ever stood by me? In the afternoon, Olivia called. I declined. A second later, her texts came in. Olivia, absolutely pathetic, Sophia. You're such a petty and selfish person. Olivia, do you really think you're better than us? If you didn't want to help, you should have said so from the start instead of pretending to be the good one. Olivia, you've destroyed this family. Congratulations. I laughed. A dry, bitter laugh. Did they really believe I was the one in the wrong? Then, Parker called. This time, I answered. Me, what? Parker, what the hell do you think you're doing? Me, taking back what's mine. Parker. You're disgusting, Sophia. You cut off support for mom and dad just because they didn't leave you any inheritance? You're nothing but a greedy leech. Me, this isn't about money, Parker, it's about respect. Something I never got from any of you. Parker, you're a venomous snake. You think you can abandon this family without consequences? Just wait. He hung up before I could say another word. A cold shiver ran down my spine. They weren't going to stop. I stared at my phone, then at my contact list. Each name, Mom, Dad, Olivia, Parker, glowed on the screen. The people who had relied on me their entire lives, only to turn on me the moment I stopped providing. Not a single one of them regretted anything. Not a single one of them said, I'm sorry. All they had to offer was anger, threats, and insults. I gripped my phone tightly, then slowly pressed block number. One by one, their names faded, disappearing from my contact list. For the first time in years, I felt peace. I knew they would try to come back, but at least for tonight, I could sleep without the weight of their demands and accusations pressing down on me. I set my phone down, took a sip of wine, and for the first time in years, I smiled. I was free. 3 weeks passed in a dangerous silence. After blocking their numbers, I had enjoyed a rare period of peace. No more guilt-tripping calls. No more blame-filled messages. No more relentless demands. I focused on work, built new routines, and for the first time in years, I lived without the suffocating weight of obligation. But I wasn't naive enough to think it was over. And I was right. On Friday afternoon, as I sat in a conference room waiting for a client presentation, my phone buzzed violently. A message from my mother. Mom, Sophia, the family is having an important meeting. You need to be there, 7 p.m., the old house. This is not an invitation, it's your responsibility. Family meeting. I closed my eyes, irritation flaring inside me. This wasn't a goodwill gesture, this was an ambush. I could ignore it. I could go on with my new life. But some foolish part of me, some part that still stupidly believed in miracles, wanted to see what they would do next. I sent back a single word. Fine. When I arrived, Parker's BMW and Olivia's obnoxiously pink Mini Cooper were already neatly parked in the driveway. As I stepped onto the porch, my mother opened the door almost instantly, a fake smile plastered on her face. Sophia, you finally decided to come home. I stepped inside. The once familiar house now felt suffocating. My father sat in the center of the living room, his face serious. Parker and Olivia lounged on the couch, their eyes glinting with triumph. Something was very wrong. Slowly I pulled out a chair, sat down, crossed my legs, and folded my arms. So, I said flatly, what is this about? My father cleared his throat, his gaze sharp. We need to resolve this tension. I let out a dry chuckle. Tension? You mean the fact that I stopped paying for all of you? My mother exhaled, trying to keep her voice gentle. Sophia, you overreacted. Your father and I only wanted what was best for you. Parker scoffed. Did you even think, before cutting us off like that? Do you not see how childish and selfish that was? I clenched my jaw. Childish? Selfish? My voice was dangerously low. I have kept this family afloat for over a decade. If anyone here is selfish, it's all of you. Olivia crossed her arms, her voice soft but laced with poison. You're acting like a victim. But let's be real. You're just mad because Mom and Dad didn't leave you an inheritance, aren't you? A cold fury burned in my chest. I slowly stood up, my gaze sweeping across each of their faces. I came here because I thought maybe you had finally realized what you did wrong. I let out a sharp laugh. But no, you're still the same leeches, selfish, ungrateful. My mother shot up from her seat, her voice sharp as a blade. If you walk out that door, don't expect to be welcomed back. I stopped at the doorway, my hand gripping the doorknob. I turned my head, locking eyes with her, my voice cold as ice. I never felt welcome here in the first place. Then I opened the door and walked away without looking back. I drove home, my heart pounding against my ribs. I didn't know what they would do next, but I knew they wouldn't let it go. And just as I expected, the moment I arrived at my apartment, I froze. My door was sealed shut. A thick layer of grayish-white expanding foam covered the entire doorframe, spilling over the edges, hardened like cement. Someone had deliberately sabotaged my home. I didn't need to ask who. My grip tightened around my phone, fury boiling in my veins. I opened my security camera app, my pulse racing as I rewound the footage. There he was. Wearing a gray hoodie and a baseball cap, grinning smugly as he held a can of expanding foam, spraying it all over my door. My hands clenched into fists. Did they really think they could intimidate me? Did they think I would crawl back, begging for forgiveness? No. I wasn't letting them get away with this. I stood in front of my sealed door, my breath heavy with anger. I wasn't shocked, nothing about them could surprise me anymore. But I was furious. Not because of their childish antics, but because of their arrogance. The sheer stupidity of thinking they could do this and face no consequences. I reopened the security app and fast-forwarded through the footage. Just as I suspected, Parker appeared on the screen. Wearing a gray hoodie, his cap pulled low to hide his face, but I recognized his lazy gait. I recognized the smug smirk as he aimed the nozzle at my door, flooding every crevice with foam. Every movement was an insult. He did this because he thought I wouldn't fight back. He was wrong. Calmly I saved the video, took clear screenshots of his face, and immediately called the police. 30 minutes later, a young police officer stood in front of my apartment, his expression a mix of sympathy and professionalism. I showed him the footage, explaining the situation in crisp detail. "Do you want to file a formal complaint?" he asked, his tone neutral but hesitant, as if hoping I would let it slide. I let out a cold chuckle. "I didn't call you here for a friendly chat." He nodded, flipping open his notebook to start an official report. "Parker, that's your brother, right?" I met his gaze, my voice ice cold. "Not anymore." The next morning, my father called. "Dad. Sophia, sweetheart, does this really have to go this far?" Me. "Are you calling to ask me to drop the charges?" Dad. "It's not that. It's just... Parker was just upset. He didn't mean any harm." Me. Scoffs. "No harm, he sealed my door shut, Dad. What if I had an important meeting this morning? What if I had a cat or a child inside?" Dad. Silence. Me. "He thought he could intimidate me. I'll show him he picked the wrong person." Dad. "Do you really want to push this that far?" Me. "It's not me. Parker did this. If he didn't want consequences, he shouldn't have acted like a reckless idiot." Dad. "What do you want to drop the charges?" Me. $33,000. Dad. "What?" Me. "That covers the cost of repairing my door, legal fees if this drags out, and damages for harassment. I'd say that's a pretty reasonable number." Dad. "This is extortion." Me. Chuckled coldly. "No, Dad, this is consequences." Dad. Parker doesn't have that kind of money. Me, then you and Mom can help him out. You've been covering for him his whole life. This is just one more time. Dad. Claudine gripped the Sophia. You're tearing this family apart. Me. This family tore itself apart a long time ago. 3 days later, my account received exactly $33,000, transferred from my parents' joint account. No messages from my mother. No complaints from Parker. Even Olivia, who relished every opportunity to be cruel, was completely silent. They thought that sending the money would make me go away. But what they didn't understand was this. I didn't need them anymore. I stood in front of my apartment door, now fully repaired, my fingers running over the smooth surface. The $33,000 wasn't the important part. What mattered was that, for the first time, they had been forced to take responsibility for their actions. They could hate me, they could call me a traitor. But for the first time in my life, they couldn't force me to obey. I smirked, taking a sip of wine. They thought they could break me. But in the end, they were the ones who lost. I had thought that after sending the $33,000, they would finally leave me alone. But I had given them too much credit. Losing money was one thing. Losing control? That, they couldn't handle. And when they could no longer manipulate me with their usual tricks, they played dirty. It started with a flood of hypocritical messages from distant relatives, whose faces I could barely remember. Aunt Susan, Sophia, I'm very disappointed in you. Your parents sacrificed their whole lives for you, and this is how you repay them? Uncle Mark, Sophia, don't let money make you lose your humanity. Remember, family is forever. Cousin Rachel, I can't believe you're heartless enough to abandon your parents like this. They're about to lose their home, don't you feel any guilt? I read each message, feeling both amused and disgusted. I knew exactly who was behind this. Mom. She couldn't win against me with logic, so she used the fear of social judgment to attack me instead. She had spun an entirely new narrative. One where I was the ungrateful daughter, abandoning my poor aging parents. So greedy and heartless that I cut off all financial support, leaving them on the brink of losing their home. A perfect sob story. Except for one problem. It wasn't true. I had carried their financial burdens for over a decade. I had paid their mortgage, covered their bills, funded Parker and Olivia, without ever asking for anything in return. They weren't abandoned. They had used me. And I was done. I opened my laptop and logged into Facebook. I didn't post often, but today would be an exception. I didn't need them to love me anymore. I just needed them to lose the ability to twist the truth. My fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard, each word appearing on the screen, sharp, clear, leaving no room for deception. I tried to be a good daughter, but they never truly loved me. For over 10 years, I paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for my parents, covering their mortgage, bills, and even my siblings' tuition. I never complained, because I believed families should support each other. But when my parents wrote their will, they left everything to Parker and Olivia. When I asked why, their answer was, because you have a career, you don't need it. When I protested, they called me selfish. When I stopped financing them, they called me a traitor. And now, they are spreading lies that I abandoned them, that they are about to lose their home, that I am a heartless daughter. Here's the truth. They are not losing their home, they are only losing the free financial support I provided for years. I'm not sharing this for sympathy, I'm sharing it for anyone else who has been exploited by their own family to know this. You do not have to keep suffering. Setting boundaries is not ungrateful. Refusing to be used is not betrayal. And sometimes, family isn't defined by blood, but by those who truly respect and appreciate you. I have walked away from their lives. And I have no regrets. I hit post. Within an hour, the post had hundreds of shares and thousands of comments. Some were supportive. I've been in your position, stay strong. You don't owe them anything. You've done more than enough. I admire your courage for speaking out. Others were critical. Family may be flawed, but they're still family. Don't air out your dirty laundry like this. She's just looking for attention. Shameful to expose your own parents like this. I didn't care. I expected this. 3 hours after I posted the truth, my mother called. Mom. Sophia, what the hell are you doing? Me, calmly telling the truth. Mom. You're destroying this family's reputation. Me. No, Mom. You did that the moment you decided to turn me into the villain in your story. Mom. You're going to regret this. Me. No. You're the one who will regret it. I hung up, feeling lighter than ever. They couldn't hide the truth anymore. And for the first time, I had taken back my voice. 3 months after exposing the truth, I had never felt so free. No more guilt-tripping messages, no more heavy phone calls. No one could manipulate me anymore. I was finally living for myself. At first, the emptiness was strange. Losing a family, no matter how toxic, still left an odd void. But then I realized it wasn't a loss. It was freedom. I threw myself into my career, leaving behind the chaos of my past. With no one leeching off my income, my money was mine. Completely. I signed up for a photography class, something I had never dared to make time for before. I started traveling, exploring the places I had always put off because I was too busy helping my family. 3 months later, I was in Paris, sipping coffee by the Seine. 6 months later, I stood atop Machu Picchu, feeling the fierce wind rush through the ancient ruins. For the first time in my life, I was responsible for no one but myself. And it was worth more than any inheritance. I didn't follow them anymore, but news of my old family still found its way to me, through old acquaintances, through whispers in the community. My mother had taken a job as a waitress at a small diner. A former co-worker of hers happened to see her and said she no longer carried the aura of a woman who once ordered me around. She wasn't spending money on spas or designer clothes anymore. My father, the man who had stayed silent through every injustice I endured, was now working as a laborer at a construction supply store. He had no one left to rely on, no one to pay his bills for him anymore. Parker was unemployed. He had laughed at me when I walked away, but now, there was no one left to fund his failed startup ventures. Olivia was still trapped in her delusion, desperately trying to become a social media star. But no one was paying for her vacations anymore. No one was buying her designer outfits to flaunt on Instagram. My entire family was struggling. But I didn't feel guilty. I had given them a chance. And they ruined it with their own greed. A year later, I met Alex. I had never been looking for love. But he came into my life like a quiet breeze, demanding nothing, expecting nothing. He wasn't like the people I had known before. He wasn't someone who only saw me for what I could give them. He saw me. Truly saw me. We met during a hiking trip with mutual friends. At first I thought he was just like everyone else, another passing stranger. But then he listened, patiently, without ever demanding anything from me except me. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to prove my worth. I didn't have to buy love. I only had to be myself. Standing on my apartment balcony, on a December evening, I looked down at the city lights shimmering below. No one controlled me anymore. No one exploited me anymore. I didn't need my old family anymore. I once thought being cut out of the will was humiliation, a betrayal. But now, I realized, it was the greatest gift they had ever given me. Sophia's story isn't just a tale of family betrayal. It's the journey of someone who once believed that sacrifice would bring love and recognition. The truth is, many people find themselves trapped in the cycle of being used by the very people who should cherish them the most. But this story proves that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's self-respect. Sometimes, losing a toxic family isn't a loss. It's an opportunity to find freedom, happiness, and the people who truly value you. What do you think about Sophia's story? Have you ever experienced something similar or known someone who has? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to follow the channel for more shocking, heartfelt, and real stories about family and life. If someone told me that family is the most sacred thing in the world, I would laugh. My family? They discarded me long ago. They don't care whether I live or die, as long as someone is still willing to provide them with money. I am Olivia, 28 years old, a financial analyst at one of the largest investment firms in New York. My life is considered stable, perhaps even enviable. A high-end apartment in the heart of Manhattan, a well-paying job, and enough savings to buy a house soon without needing a loan. I built all of this on my own, without asking for help from anyone, and most importantly, without any support from my family. In fact, I cut ties with them 8 years ago, and I have never regretted that decision. 8 years ago, I walked out of my childhood home with nothing but empty hands and a bleeding heart. That was the day I realized that, in their eyes, I was never important enough. I had done everything to be acknowledged, to make them proud, to prove that I was also worthy of love. But in the end, I was just a faint shadow next to their beloved daughter, Chloe. Chloe was 2 years older than me, and in my parents' eyes, she was the center of the universe. Since childhood, I had grown used to being pushed aside to make room for her. My birthday parties? Always overshadowed by some important event of Chloe's. My academic achievements? No one cared because they were too busy preparing for one of her dances or dates. But I kept trying, believing that if I worked harder, if I excelled more, one day, they would finally see me. The day I received my acceptance letter from one of the most prestigious universities, I thought that was the moment everything would change. I had earned a partial scholarship in finance and only needed a small amount of financial support from my family to fulfill my dream. But when I eagerly shared the news, their response crushed all my hopes. "Olivia, we can't help you with tuition," my mother said casually, not even looking up from her phone. "But you promised. You said you would use Grandma's inheritance to help me go to college." I tried to keep my voice from shaking. My father sighed, his tone filled with boredom. "Things have changed, honey. Chloe is getting married, and we need that money for her wedding. College can wait, but a dream wedding can't be postponed." I stood there, frozen, as my sister merely shrugged. She didn't even bother to apologize. I remember the feeling of hot blood rushing to my face, my chest tightening as if it was being crushed. Everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, just to be discarded like a worthless object? That night, I packed my bags, walked out of that house, and never looked back. I turned to Aunt Helen, the only family member who had ever treated me with kindness. She pulled me into a hug without needing any explanation, and simply said, "You're not alone, Olivia. You deserve a better life." And I turned those words into motivation. I worked my way through college, struggling to survive in this harsh world, but I never gave up. 4 years later, I graduated with honors and landed my first job in the investment industry. Before long, I climbed the ranks quickly, tripled my salary, and gradually built a life I once thought was only a dream. Now, I have everything I need: a solid career, financial freedom, and most importantly, I am no longer tied to those who never appreciated me. Family? They are just a closed chapter of my past. Or at least, that's what I thought. Until I received a call from Aunt Helen on a chilly November morning. Her voice was as gentle as ever, but I could sense hesitation in her words. "Olivia, will you be coming home for Thanksgiving?" I stiffened. Home? After 8 years? I no longer considered that place my home. But I owed Aunt Helen so much, and I couldn't refuse her outright. I tried to keep my voice neutral. "Are you hosting as usual?" "Yes, but this year, it's a little different." She paused for a moment before continuing. "Your parents and Chloe will be there too." My stomach dropped. I thought I had buried them in the past, but with one simple sentence, all the painful memories came rushing back. I should say no, I should tell her I have other plans. But instead, I let out a quiet sigh. "Aunt Helen, I'm not sure." She didn't push. "Take your time to think about it, Olivia. But no matter what, I would love to see you." I hung up the phone and stared out the window. The gray sky of New York mirrored my own mood. I had escaped them. I had rebuilt my life from nothing. But was I ready to face my past one more time? Old memories never truly disappear. They just lie dormant, waiting for a moment of weakness to resurface, crushing everything you thought had healed. I remember the day my life changed forever. It was a sweltering summer afternoon when I held that acceptance letter in my hands, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I had done it. After years of relentless effort, I had earned a partial scholarship for finance. That meant I only needed a small amount of support from my family to afford tuition and living expenses. Just a small amount. Nothing compared to what they had spent on Chloe all these years. I rushed home, almost forgetting the scorching heat burning the pavement. My mother was sitting on the couch, lightly tapping her fingernails against her phone screen. My father was watching the news, a cold beer rolling in his hand. Chloe, as usual, was lounging on the chaise, her eyes glued to her laptop. Probably browsing for more extravagant things for her upcoming wedding. I nearly shouted in excitement. "Mom, Dad, I got in! Columbia University's scholarship. I just need a little financial support to cover the rest, and I can enroll." I waited for a smile, a congratulations, or at least a nod of approval from them. But all I received was heavy silence. My mother sighed, set her phone down on the table, and crossed her arms. "Olivia, we can't help you." I froze. "What? But you promised. Grandma's money. She made it clear it was for my college." My father glanced at me, his face showing clear irritation. "We've already used it." I blinked, my heart pounding in my chest. "Used it? On what?" Chloe laughed, not even bothering to hide the smugness on her flawless face. "My wedding, of course. An event this important has to be perfect. Did you think all of this just magically happened?" A loud ringing filled my ears, as if someone had shut off all other sounds in the world, leaving only their harsh words echoing inside my head. "No. No way." I shook my head, my voice cracking. "You promised Grandma. That money was mine. You had no right." My mother cut me off, her voice sharp with annoyance. "Chloe needed it more than you do. You're smart, you can figure things out on your own, but a wedding only happens once in a lifetime, Olivia. You can't be selfish." Selfish? I almost laughed. They had stolen my future, crushed my hopes, and now they were calling me selfish? Years of pent-up emotions surged forward. I could no longer hold back. The family meeting I had envisioned in my head was nothing like this. I had imagined it as a proud moment. One where they would tell me I deserved a bright future. But no. I was just the outsider. I had never truly belonged in this family. "I can't believe this," I whispered, my chest tightening. "You'll be fine, Olivia," my father said, patting the armrest of his chair as if that were some kind of genuine reassurance. "College can wait. But a dream wedding? Not everyone gets that chance." Chloe shrugged. "Come on, Olivia. You can still get a job and pay for school yourself. It's not a big deal, right?" I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. "You're right," I nodded, my voice turning ice cold. "I'll take care of myself. But from now on, don't expect anything from me, ever again." I turned and walked straight to my room, slamming the door shut behind me. I threw my backpack onto the bed, my mind spinning. No money, no support, nothing. But I knew I couldn't stay here another second. I had only one choice. I picked up my phone and dialed the only number I knew I could trust. Aunt Helen answered on the second ring. "Olivia?" Her voice was gentle but full of concern. A lump rose in my throat as the bitter reality sank in. "Aunt Helen, can I come stay with you?" There wasn't a moment of hesitation. "Of course, sweetheart, my door is always open for you." I didn't take much with me, just a small suitcase, a few clothes, some important documents. I didn't bother saying goodbye. As I walked out the door, they didn't even look up. Only when I boarded the bus and watched that neighborhood fade into the distance, did I finally allow myself to cry. But even through the tears, one thing had never been clearer. I was never coming back. No matter what it took, no matter how hard it would be, I swore I would never let them control my life again. I don't know what made me accept Aunt Helen's invitation. Maybe it was gratitude toward her, or perhaps a part of me was still curious. 8 years with no contact, no messages, not a single inquiry. Yet now they appeared, as if nothing had ever happened. I drove to Aunt Helen's house in the late afternoon. The winter sky had already darkened, and the streetlights cast a soft golden glow over the city. My tires rolled slowly over the familiar road, leading me back to the one place that had been my only refuge after I left home. As I stepped out of the car, the scent of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie lingered in the air. A part of me felt relieved. Thanksgiving at Aunt Helen's had never changed. But when I walked through the door, I froze. My parents, Chloe. They sat there, right in Aunt Helen's living room, looking as though nothing had ever happened between us. My father had aged noticeably, with more gray streaks in his hair than I remembered. My mother looked different too. The arrogance she once carried had been replaced by worried lines around her eyes. And Chloe, she was still the same, still perfectly put together, but there was a hint of hesitation in her gaze when she met mine. Aunt Helen quickly stepped beside me, her voice gentle. "I didn't know they were coming, Olivia." I felt my heart pounding faster, but I couldn't just turn around and leave. They had already seen me. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the room, keeping my expression neutral. My mother was the first to speak. "You're here." Her voice trembled slightly, but I couldn't tell if it was from emotion or discomfort. I crossed my arms, my tone cold. "Yes. Aunt Helen invited me." The air in the room grew heavy. My father glanced at my mother, as if searching for the right words. Finally he sighed, his gaze filled with regret. "Olivia, we were wrong." I didn't respond. I just waited. "We should have reached out to you sooner. We wanted to call, we thought about writing letters so many times, but every time, we stopped because we were ashamed," my mother continued. "We know we hurt you. We know we put Chloe before you too many times. And when you left, we didn't know how to fix it." I clenched my fist slightly, feeling a storm brewing in my chest. Chloe glanced at me, and for the first time that evening, she spoke. "Olivia, I know I was given more than you. I'm not going to make excuses. But back then, I didn't think much about it. Looking back now, I understand what you went through." Their words, no matter how sincere, couldn't erase the old wounds. I still remembered the helplessness I had felt back then. Every cold-hearted word they had spoken when they refused to help me. Those memories didn't fade just because of a few late apologies. "Why now?" I asked, my voice no longer sharp but still full of doubt. "Why wait 8 years?" My mother lowered her head, clutching a tissue tightly in her hands. "Because we were afraid. We thought you would never forgive us. But when Aunt Helen told us you were coming for Thanksgiving this year, we knew this might be our last chance." I didn't know what to say. I had imagined this moment hundreds of times in my head. I had thought that if they ever came back, I would scoff, turn my back on them, and let them live with the consequences of their choices. But now, standing in front of them, I didn't feel victorious. I just felt empty. Aunt Helen placed a comforting hand on my shoulder, a simple yet encouraging gesture. "Olivia, you don't have to decide anything right now, but maybe you could try." I looked at my mother, then my father, then Chloe. Their eyes no longer held the same superiority or indifference. Only exhaustion, regret, and a flicker of hope. I took a deep breath. "I don't know if I can forgive you right away," I said slowly. "But I can try." No one spoke for a moment. Then my mother gave a small nod, her eyes glistening with tears. "Thank you, Olivia." My father gave a faint smile, and Chloe nodded, looking grateful. That night's dinner was awkward but not unbearably tense. They didn't try to force anything, nor did they pretend like nothing had happened. They gave me space to breathe, to think. I still didn't know if I could trust them again. But I knew one thing. I was willing to try. The only problem was, I had no idea where this attempt would lead me. Forgiveness is not easy. It's like a fragile bridge trying to reconnect two severed cliffs. And even though I had agreed to try, I wasn't sure if this bridge would last. After Thanksgiving, I started receiving messages from my mother. At first, they were just brief texts. "How are you?" or "How was work today?" I couldn't say I was completely comfortable with it, but at the very least it was a change. My father remained more distant. He wasn't used to taking the initiative to connect. But the one who surprised me the most was Chloe. One Friday evening, as I was getting ready to leave the office, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. I hesitated before answering. "Olivia." A hesitant voice came through. "It's me, Chloe." I froze. This was the first time she had ever reached out to me on her own, after all these years. "Is something wrong?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. On the other end, she sighed. "Can I see you for a bit?" I hesitated but eventually agreed. We arranged to meet at a small cafe near my place. When I arrived, Chloe was already there, clutching a cup of coffee, her eyes cast downward as if unsure how to begin. "Thanks for coming," she said softly. I pulled out a chair and sat down, observing her. Chloe no longer had the same confident, haughty demeanor she once did. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, her hair was hastily tied up, and though her clothes were still elegant, they no longer exuded the luxury they once did. "What happened to you?" I asked, not hiding my curiosity. Chloe let out a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. "My ex-husband is a liar." Her smile was bitter. Not only was he a terrible husband, but he was a disaster financially. Debt, fraud, affairs. I endured it all for 3 years before divorcing him. I remained silent, listening. After the divorce, I had to raise 2 kids alone, no stable job, no savings. I had no choice but to move back in with Mom and Dad. Chloe looked at me, her voice faltering. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but if you could..." I looked at her for a long moment. Chloe? The one who once had everything, the one who was always sheltered by our parents, was now sitting across from me, asking for help. I didn't know what made me nod. Maybe it was because for the first time, I saw a different version of Chloe. Not the perfect, privileged sister, but a struggling single mother just trying to survive. After that night, I started visiting my parents' house more often. At first I kept my distance, but Sunday dinners slowly became a routine. We didn't talk much about the past. Maybe we all understood that old wounds needed time to heal. I helped in ways that felt right to me. When I noticed the roof leaking, I hired a repairman. When I saw my niece wearing a thin coat in the freezing winter, I bought her a new one. I didn't do it out of guilt. I did it because I knew they truly needed it. One evening as I was about to leave, my mother hesitated. "Olivia, I don't want to ask you for anything, but..." She trailed off, looking uneasy. "Just say it," I replied. She took a deep breath. "The electricity bills, the water bills, everything is piling up. Your father and I have been trying, but it's really difficult. If you could help out a little each month, it would mean so much." I looked at her, then at the worn-down house around us. A part of me reminded myself that I owed them nothing, but another part understood that sometimes, helping isn't about the past. It's about who I choose to be. "All right," I said. "I'll send you $1,500 a month, but there's one condition. You need to start looking for a job." My mother looked at me, her eyes welling up with tears. "Thank you, Olivia, I truly appreciate it." I nodded, but deep down a lingering doubt remained. Over time, Chloe and I gradually grew closer. She was no longer the girl who only thought of herself. We started having coffee together, and our conversations became less tense. One day, when I mentioned that I had a business trip to Chicago, Chloe looked at me with hopeful eyes. "I've never been to Chicago. If you don't mind, can I come with you?" I was surprised. But then I thought, maybe this was an opportunity for us to spend more time together. All right, but you're paying for your own ticket. Chloe laughed, and for the first time in a long while, she looked genuinely at ease. Deal. Slowly, I began to feel something I never thought I could again. Something that almost felt like family. I wasn't sure if this would last forever. But at the very least, I was willing to try. I once believed that maybe things were finally getting better. That if I gave them a chance, maybe my family would truly change. But I was wrong. I received a call from Aunt Helen on a Saturday afternoon. At that moment, I was sitting in a cafe near my apartment, reviewing financial reports for a major project. When I saw her name on my screen, I quickly picked up. Olivia, do you have a moment? I need to talk to you. I frowned. There was something off about her voice, unlike her usual gentle tone. There was hesitation, tension. Go ahead, Aunt Helen. There was a brief silence before she spoke. I just came back from a gathering with some old friends, Linda and Karen. Do you remember them? They were your family's old neighbors. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. They told me something. Something you need to know. I set my coffee cup down, an uneasy feeling creeping into my chest. What is it? Aunt Helen took a deep breath, as if carefully choosing her words. They ran into your mother and Chloe at the supermarket last week, and they overheard your mother talking with some friends. They were laughing, joking, and calling you their personal ATM. I froze. What? Aunt Helen continued, her voice now filled with anger. Your mother bragged that thanks to you, she didn't need to rush to find a job, that every month you kept sending money, taking care of everything, and that you wouldn't dare refuse. Chloe was even more shameless. She told her friends that all she had to do was drop a hint and you'd pay for any trip. That you were too stupid to realize it. I felt the blood in my veins turn to ice. The cafe around me suddenly felt unfamiliar, the voices of people chatting fading into a dull hum. They had been using me. Not just that. They had been laughing about it, treating my help like some kind of joke. I'm sorry, Olivia. I didn't want to tell you, but you needed to know the truth. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breath. A part of me wanted to scream, to smash something, but instead, I just gripped my phone tighter. Thank you for telling me. Aunt Helen was silent for a moment, before asking softly, Are you okay? I let out a laugh, a hollow, joyless sound. No, Aunt Helen, but I will be. I hung up and sat there for a long time. The past few months played in my mind like a slow-motion reel, a montage of warm family dinners. The times I pulled out my wallet to help them. My mother's teary-eyed thank yous. It was all just an act. I had trusted them again, and they had betrayed me again. But this time, I wouldn't give them another chance to do it ever again. I had spent a long time thinking after my call with Aunt Helen. The anger inside me burned hot, but more than that I felt foolish, realizing I had let myself be used again. I had truly believed they had changed, that they genuinely regretted what they had done in the past. But it turned out to be nothing more than a performance, and I had played the perfect fool. But if they thought I would continue blindly catering to them, they were wrong. I needed a plan. I couldn't confront them outright, because they would deny it or twist the situation in their favor. I needed proof. I needed to see their true colors one more time, to make sure I never made this mistake a third time. And so, I decided to test them. 2 days later, I packed a small suitcase with a few clothes, stood in front of the mirror in my apartment and took a deep breath. Then, I dialed my mother's number. She picked up on the second ring. Olivia, sweetheart, what's wrong? Her voice was sweet as honey. I kept my voice shaky, trying to sound like someone on the verge of despair. Mom, something happened. I lost my job. There was a brief but noticeable silence, as if she was processing the information. What? What did you just say? I continued my act. The company made budget cuts. I was part of the layoffs. And on top of that, they're asking me to return part of my bonus due to financial adjustments. I tried, but I can't cover everything. I paused for effect, then let out a deep sigh, as if I was about to break down. Mom, I don't have enough money to keep my apartment. Can I come home for a while? This time, the silence stretched longer. What do you mean, you can't pay your rent anymore? Her voice was no longer as gentle. That's right, I replied. I really need help. I heard a sharp inhale on the other end of the line, and then my mother's tone shifted. Cold and irritated. So that means you won't be sending us money anymore? I purposely let the silence linger for a few seconds before answering softly. No, Mom, at least not for a while. This time, she didn't bother hiding her disappointment. Oh, for God's sake, Olivia, how could you let this happen? Do you have any idea how much we rely on that money? The electricity, the water, the kids' expenses? We depend on you for all of it. A bitter smile curled on my lips. How fast. Just minutes ago, I was still her sweetheart. Mom, I really don't have a choice. Just for a while. I'll find another job soon. She wasn't listening anymore. God, how could you mess everything up like this? She muttered. And then another familiar voice cut in. Chloe. What about the Europe trip? Her voice was sharp. I almost laughed out loud. And to think I actually believed she had changed. What are you talking about? I feigned confusion. The Europe trip, Olivia, you promised. You said you'd cover all the expenses. We already booked hotels and made plans. Don't tell me you're canceling. Chloe, I made my voice sound weaker. I don't have the money. I don't even have a place to stay. What the hell? Chloe snapped. I told my friends you were paying, and now you're saying you can't? How could you do this to me? This time, I stayed silent for real. I had hoped they would at least pretend to be understanding, but no, they didn't even bother hiding their selfishness anymore. Then, my mother's voice cut in again. Listen, Olivia, this house is not an option for you. I narrowed my eyes. What did you just say? If you're not contributing, you can't stay here. We don't have room for someone useless. Those words nearly took my breath away. Before I could react, I heard hurried footsteps, and then the door swung open. Chloe stepped out, my suitcase in her hand, yanking it toward the door. Take your stuff. She tilted her chin up. We don't need you anymore. I looked down at my suitcase, then up at their faces, my mother, my father, Chloe. The people I had once loved. What had I been expecting? A miracle? I let out a slow breath, then grabbed my suitcase and walked out the door. Behind me, my mother's voice rang out. Don't come back unless you have money, Olivia. I didn't turn around. I stepped down the porch, dragging my suitcase along the cold pavement under the streetlights. The wind was sharp, cutting through my coat, but my mind had never felt clearer. They had revealed their true selves. And this time, I wasn't giving them a third chance. Aunt Helen welcomed me with open arms when I arrived at her house. No questions, no judgment, just the warmth I had been missing for far too long. I assume things went exactly as you expected, she said, gently, as I set my suitcase down and sank into the couch. I let out a quiet laugh, but there was no joy in it. No, it was worse than I thought. She didn't say anything else, just silently poured me a cup of hot tea, as if she knew I needed time to process everything. I sat there, watching the steam rise from the cup, then, slowly pulled out my phone. The first thing I did was open my banking app. I scrolled to the automatic transfers section, where, every month, I had been sending $1,500 to my mother's account. Without hesitation, I tapped Cancel Recurring Payment. A confirmation message popped up. Are you sure you want to cancel? I pressed confirm without blinking. Done. No more money flowing into their hands. No more bills for me to cover. No more unreasonable demands. No more weight on my shoulders. Next, I opened the airline's website and went to manage my booking. Chloe's Europe trip. I skimmed through the details. 5-star hotels, first-class flights, all paid for by me. I clicked cancel reservation. Quick, clean, with zero regrets. I could already picture Chloe's face when she received the cancellation notice. I was sure she would explode with rage. But this time, I didn't care. A week later, I stood in my new apartment, something I had been quietly preparing for a long time. A spacious space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, filled with natural light. Every piece of furniture, every painting on the wall, every chair in the living room. I had chosen them myself. This was mine. No one had given it to me. No one had helped me. I had built it on my own. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera and snapped a picture. In the frame, I stood in the middle of my new apartment, the city skyline glowing behind me in the night. I posted it on social media with the caption, "Dream come true, finally a homeowner, no loans, no burdens, just hard work and resilience. New home. Freedom. No more strings attached." I didn't need to tag anyone, I knew they would see it. And sure enough, less than 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from my mother. I stared at the screen for a long moment. The familiar number flashed, but this time, there was no excitement, no anticipation. I picked up. "Olivia!" My mother's voice was frantic. "What is that picture? You bought a house? But you said you lost your job." I smiled slightly, my voice calm. "Oh, Mom, actually, I never lost my job. It was just a little experiment." There was a deadly silence, then, my mother shrieked. "What do you mean?" "I wanted to see if you cared about me, or just my money," I replied, my tone calm but sharp. "And you know what? You already gave me the answer." "Olivia, sweetheart. That's not what I meant. I was just shocked, you have to understand. Everything can go back to the way it was, right? We're family." I let out a small chuckle, but this time, it wasn't the laughter of someone who still believed that. "No, Mom, nothing can go back to the way it was." "You can't do this to your family," my mother screamed. "We raised you. You owe us." I frowned. "Oh? You took away my college fund to pay for Chloe. When I begged for help, you abandoned me. And when I thought I could give you a second chance, you just used me all over again. So tell me, who really owes who here?" There was commotion in the background. I heard Chloe's voice. "Mom, tell her to rebook my flights right now. I can't believe she canceled my trip." I sighed. "Well, that says it all." "Olivia, don't hang up. We can talk." I ended the call. Then, without hesitation, I went into my contacts and blocked my mother's number. After that, I logged into social media and blocked everyone in the family. The silence that followed was blissful. I looked around my apartment, a wave of relief spreading through my chest. This was my home. A life no longer tied to people who only saw me as a source of money. That evening, Aunt Helen came over. I had made dinner. Her favorite lasagna. "Are you okay?" she asked as we sat on the balcony, looking out over the city. I lifted my wine glass, clinked it lightly against hers, and smiled. "Aunt Helen, I've never felt better. Sometimes, true freedom doesn't come from revenge or arguments. It comes from letting go, moving forward, and never looking back." Olivia's story is a powerful reminder that not all family relationships are built on love and appreciation. Sometimes the people who should care about us the most are the ones who take advantage of us the worst. Setting boundaries and recognizing your worth isn't selfish, it's necessary for self-preservation. Olivia learned that family is not an unconditional obligation, and sometimes, walking away is the only way to find peace. What do you think about Olivia's decision? Was she right to cut ties with her family, or should she have given them another chance? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss more emotional real-life stories and deep lessons on family, relationships and independence. They say the moment you hit rock bottom is also when you discover the true nature of those you thought always loved you. I found that out the day my own biological father kicked me out of our $8 million mansion, just because I refused to become his clone. Instead of a hug or a congratulatory word, he threw a thin wad of cash in my face and coldly said something I'll never forget. "You're worth this much, Lily. A useless brat like you is lucky if you end up changing light bulbs for other people." I had just turned 23, freshly graduated with honors in energy engineering from UC Berkeley. But my father didn't care. He hadn't even bothered showing up to my graduation ceremony, claiming he had a meeting with the company's senior stakeholders. My mother wasn't there either. She always stayed silent and sided with him, like a smiling shadow, swirling her martini while avoiding my eyes. I stood in the grand foyer flooded with golden chandelier light and cold white marble beneath my feet, gripping the handle of my old suitcase, the only thing I still had from college. Behind my father, the giant portrait of my grandfather stared down with stern eyes and a condescending look, as if judging me from the afterlife. My father, Henry Langston, was the CEO of Langston Financial Group, a family-run financial empire spanning 4 generations. In his eyes, the only worthy career for a child was joining the company, learning how to manipulate markets and sniff out billion-dollar deals. But I was different. I wanted to create real value, not just count other people's money. I wanted to research and develop sustainable energy storage systems. A field he called wishful thinking that'll never earn a dime. "An engineer? You mean willingly live like a plumber?" he sneered when I spoke of my dream. I remember clearly the moment he stood up from his expensive leather armchair, reached into his wallet and pulled out a $50 bill and a few crisp $20 bills. He threw them on the floor, right where I had stood moments earlier taking graduation photos with my mom, still holding onto a fragile hope that my family might be proud. "Take it. That's all you're worth." I stared at the bills scattered on the cold marble floor, feeling like my entire world had collapsed. It wasn't the small amount of money. It was the statement, sharp like a blade, straight to my pride. My mother stood by the staircase, turning away like the scene unfolding was a dull commercial she'd seen 1,000 times. I bent down and picked up the money. My fingers trembled. Not from fear, but because I knew I'd never come back to this place again. "I don't need your permission to succeed," I said. My eyes locked on his. He waved me off like shooing away a beggar. "Get out, and don't you dare use the Langston name to get a job or build anything. No one's opening doors for you without my name behind it." I walked out through the heavy oak doors with nothing but my one suitcase, an engineering degree in my bag, and exactly $110 in my wallet. The entirety of what I had after 4 years of college. The tall black iron gates slammed shut behind me with a screeching groan, like a final sentence pronounced. I had no home. The student apartment I lived in had been vacated. No car. The sedan I used to drive was under my father's name. No savings account either. It had been pulled the moment I declared I wouldn't join Langston Financial. I walked down the street like a stranger in a city that used to be home. But I carried something they would never understand. An idea, a determination, and a pain I would never forget. I left home in humiliation and disgrace, but they would remember the name they once disowned. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I'd make sure they couldn't ignore the true worth of the person they once called worthless. I don't remember how long I slept during the nearly 10-hour bus ride from Denver to San Jose. I just know that when I opened my eyes, I felt like a stranger among the rush of people, neon lights, and tech billboards of Silicon Valley. It was drizzling, and the cold soaked through my thin hoodie, making me shiver. I checked my wallet. Just $80 left after buying the ticket. And grabbing a sandwich on the way. I had nowhere to go. No friends, no relatives, no one waiting for me in this place. Except a fragile hope that the idea I had nurtured for the past 4 years might have a chance to survive in the so-called cradle of big dreamers. At night, I slept in a park near El Camino Real, curled up on a cold bench. My laptop was in my backpack, pressed tightly against my chest like the only valuable thing I had left. Every unfamiliar sound startled me. I was terrified someone would steal the hard drive containing my energy storage system design, the one I'd spent my entire senior year working on. The next morning, I dragged myself into a small coffee shop called Willow Beans, tucked between two old office buildings. I only meant to buy a hot cup of coffee to warm up, but somehow ended up staying for hours, pretending to work on my laptop just to have an excuse to stay in a place with free Wi-Fi and a power outlet. That's when Emma, the barista, noticed me. A girl about my age, messy brown curls, wary eyes but not unkind. "Hey, if you're gonna camp out here with just one Americano, at least don't hog the whole big table," she said, wiping down the espresso machine that was hissing like it was about to explode. I sighed, closed my laptop, and was about to get up when the machine groaned loudly and sputtered out a jet of steaming dark brown liquid that splattered everywhere. "It's broken again," Emma hissed, giving the machine a light kick. I looked at her, then at the machine. An idea flashed through my mind like lightning in a storm. "I could try fixing it, if you give me another cup of coffee and somewhere to sleep tonight." She stared at me like I'd just declared I was an alien. "What? Who do you think you are, some kind of HVAC engineer or something?" "Close, energy engineer, just graduated from Berkeley." Emma went quiet. Then she crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow. "All right, if you can get that monster back up and running in 20 minutes, I'll talk to the manager and see if there's room in the storage for you to sleep, but if you break it worse, I'm calling the cops." I gave a small smile and pulled out a screwdriver from my backpack, a tool I always carried out of habit, a hard one to shake for any engineer. 15 minutes later, the machine let out a psh and started pouring coffee smoothly, like it had never broken down. Emma's mouth dropped open. "You just saved the whole store." The manager, a Mexican man named Carlos, nodded after hearing the whole story, then led me to the storage room in the back. It was packed with coffee bags, paper cups, and industrial toilet paper rolls, but it was clean and dry. To me at that moment, it felt like a 5-star hotel. I started working part-time at Willow Beans. Fixing small things, cleaning machines, sometimes helping with orders during rush hour. During the day, I worked. At night, I crawled back into the storage room, opened my laptop, and kept redrawing the energy storage system design in my head. The idea I was pursuing was a molecular battery with an entirely new structure, allowing renewable energy to be stored with near-perfect efficiency. No leakage, no waste. No reliance on expensive lithium. A feasible solution for the future of sustainable energy. Emma often brought me leftover muffins at the end of the day, then sat down on the floor, sneaking peeks at my screen as I sketched molecular diagrams. "What's that?" she asked the first time. "The future," I replied, eyes still fixed on the screen. "If I can pull this off, the system could change the entire electricity industry worldwide." "Sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie." She laughed. "But you do seem pretty serious." "I don't have a choice. They threw me out of the house because they thought I was a failure. Now I'm going to prove just how wrong they were." Emma was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Then you need to survive first. The future sounds expensive." I laughed. Her words were more accurate than anything I'd ever heard from a professor. I had $38 left in my wallet, but I had the design, I had my brain, I had a place to sleep, and for the first time in days, I had someone who believed I wasn't crazy. I didn't have anything in hand. But for me that was enough to begin. 3 months after I moved into the storage room at Willow Beans, I began to feel the fine line between exhaustion and obsession. During the day, I scrubbed machines, fixed leaky pipes, hauled heavy bags of coffee. At night, I buried myself in circuit diagrams, running simulations of the new molecular battery on my aging laptop. I had no lab, no research funding, and no one backing me. Except myself, and an idea no one else dared to try. One rainy morning, I fixed a receipt printer for a man named Ethan Rhodes, the owner of a startup specializing in energy measurement devices. When I helped him troubleshoot an electrical error in the control circuit, something in his eyes changed. It was no longer the look of a customer at a low-level employee, but the look of someone recognizing something unusual. "You're really an engineer?" Ethan asked, surprised and skeptical. Graduated from Berkeley. Energy systems major, I replied, wiping my hands with a grease-stained rag. And you're working here? I gave a crooked smile. Not everyone was wrapped in velvet from birth. Ethan was silent for a few seconds, then handed me a business card. I want you to meet someone. If what you're saying is true, she'll be interested. That person was Professor Linda Zhang, a molecular research specialist at Stanford University. A week later, I was sitting in her small office in the main research facility, palms soaked in sweat. Tell me your idea, she said, sitting across from me, eyes cold as steel. I presented the molecular battery design based on a nanoporous structure, optimized for storing renewable energy without heat loss. Something current lithium-ion batteries have never been able to do. Professor Zhang said nothing for almost 10 minutes. She carefully read through the technical description, scrutinizing every line of the equations I had handwritten in sharp, slanted strokes. Theoretically, it's impressive, Lily, but has anyone validated this model? No, because no one believes me. She looked at me, then suddenly gave a quiet laugh. I know a place that could help you verify it, but I'm not holding your hand to get there, unless you're ready to work like a monster for the next 365 days. I looked her straight in the eye. I've lived in a storage room, cleaned a coffee shop, taken on freelance engineering gigs every night. I'm willing to die for this project, if I have to. 3 days later, I received an email approving my use of the Advanced Materials Lab at UC Berkeley as an independent research collaborator. From that moment, the real grind officially began. I didn't quit the coffee shop job. I needed the money. Outside of my hours at Willow Beans, I fixed circuit boards for startups, designed power supply systems for measurement devices, even drew CAD models for senior year student projects. Any engineering work. I took it. I slept an average of 3 hours a day. In the mornings, I brewed coffee. Afternoons, I ran around small office buildings in the valley. At night, I dove into the Berkeley lab like a tech addict. I drank coffee like water, survived on cheap sandwiches, and held on to one thing: never let myself collapse. Every test was filled with failure. Every wrong measurement meant I had to grit my teeth and revise dozens of lines of code and design drafts. But I didn't stop. Not after coming this far. One October night, at exactly 2:47 a.m., I burst into tears in the lab. Not from pain, but because for the first time after hundreds of attempts, the results showed an energy storage efficiency of 98.7%. A number I had never seen in any scientific paper I'd read. I thought I was hallucinating. I triple-checked, then printed the results and brought them to Professor Zhang's office at 5 a.m. She looked at the data, then raised her head, narrowing her eyes. This isn't just a breakthrough, this is a revolution. I trembled, leaning against the wall, mind spinning between joy and exhaustion. You think anyone would invest? If they don't, they're idiots, she replied coldly. I'll arrange a few meetings for you, but remember, Lily, this is just the beginning. I looked at the design in my hands, still unable to believe it was real. It had started with a suitcase, $110, and a slap in the face from my own father. Now, I was standing on the edge of changing the global energy industry. And this was just the first step. I walked into my first pitch meeting with hands shaking from cold, or fear, maybe both. Across from me sat 3 investors, representing a well-known venture capital firm in San Mateo. I wore an old blazer borrowed from Emma, hair tied neatly, a touch of lipstick to avoid looking like a corpse after 6 months of lab-induced exhaustion. I laid out everything: the new battery structure, the data, the application potential, and even a commercialization strategy. The last thing I said was, if you don't invest, someone else will. But you'll regret it. The 3 of them looked at each other, nodding slightly. One of them said, voice cold as ice, very ambitious, but not enough experience. You're too young, too new, and this technology is still too far from reality. Sorry. I pressed my lips together and bowed my head. The first rejection. Many more to come. 2 weeks later, 3 more meetings. 2 rejections, 1 "we'll consider it." I knew that meant never. I returned to the storage room after the last meeting, collapsed onto the thin mattress. Emma sat beside me, handed me a cup of coffee and said softly, "They can reject you as many times as they want, but you only need one person to believe in you." I nodded. That sentence kept me going for another week. Then one day, I received an email from Orion Capital, a rising venture firm specializing in clean tech investments. The sender signed, Alexa Morgan, Managing Partner. The meeting took place on the 12th floor of a glass building in downtown Palo Alto. I had prepared everything thoroughly: presentation deck, technical reports, financial models. But the first thing Alexa asked when I entered the room stopped me cold. "Why should I believe you? You've got nothing but a few papers, a diploma, and a dream." I looked her straight in the eye. "Because I gave up everything to pursue this. No parental support, no inheritance, no connections. I've been sleeping in a storage room, working 16 hours a day for a year straight. I have nothing to lose. But if you invest, I'll make the impossible happen, just like I did with that prototype." Alexa was silent. I thought I'd failed again. "If I invest, what would you name the company?" I blinked. "Astrovault. Because it's a burst of light in the dark. Just like how I started from nothing." 3 days later, I got the call. $5 million, 25% equity. The deal was approved. I held the phone, standing silently in the empty parking lot behind the coffee shop. My eyes burned. Not because of the money, but because someone finally believed in me. Not because of my last name, not because of connections, but because of who I was. The first office of Astrovault was in a refurbished warehouse near Fremont. I hired 4 engineers, 3 from Berkeley, 1 from a young tech startup program. They were young, relentless, and just as wild as I was. We worked like mad, from fine-tuning the molecular structure to reduce energy loss, to designing heat-resistant casings, to developing smart conversion circuits. Every day was a challenge. Every technical error was a battle with our own limits. 6 months later, Astrovault Core 1's first commercial prototype was born. Smaller than a microwave, with an efficiency of 99.1%, far surpassing anything on the market. The test results were independently verified by the California Clean Energy Center. The day I received the official report, I hugged Emma and cried in the very coffee shop where it all began. "You did it," Emma whispered. "Now they'll have to listen." And they did. Energy companies started knocking, governments sent partnership offers, competitors started getting nervous. Within 3 months, we signed 2 contracts to supply energy storage systems to major solar power stations in Arizona and Nevada. The media called me the woman who broke the laws of physics. I didn't care. I only remembered one thing: my father's look of disdain the day he threw me out with just $110. I swore when I came back, I'd show him just how much a worthless person like me was truly worth. 3 years after Astrovault launched its first product, I stepped onto the stage of the New York Stock Exchange, a small gavel in hand, as the founding team cheered. Our stock, ASTV, doubled within the first 6 hours. By the end of the week, I wasn't just the founder, I was the majority shareholder, worth over $100 million. The name Lily Langston started appearing everywhere, on newspapers, media outlets, and at global tech conferences. But no one knew I had legally changed my name to Lily Beckett, leaving Langston behind as a way to sever the past. No one, except Emma, and a few of my closest people, knew the connection between me and one of Colorado's oldest investment empires. Langston Capital. The thing was, Langston Capital was on the brink of collapse. My father's blind arrogance, resistance to change, and outdated pride had left his empire crushed by the rise of fintech markets. Within a year, they lost nearly 40% of their managed assets, investors pulled out en masse, and they faced the looming threat of a takeover by younger, tech-savvy competitors. What my father didn't know was that the tech rival threatening him was my own company. I had founded Beacon Venture Holdings, a strategic investment arm under Astrovolt, specializing in acquiring struggling firms to restructure and integrate clean energy technologies into their ecosystems. Through 4 subsidiaries, 3 trust funds, and 2 independent entities, Beacon quietly acquired 43% of Langston Capital's shares in just 7 months. And then I decided to return home. Not to ask for forgiveness, but to buy back the place that once threw me away. That fall morning, I stepped out of a sleek black Tesla in front of the white limestone building that once symbolized the Langston family's power. It didn't look much different from the last time I saw it. Still the massive stone columns, the gilded letters, and the smug expressions of the sharply dressed receptionists. I walked into the main lobby, hair tied high, wearing a custom-tailored suit by a brand I had invested in. The receptionist looked up, eyes unfamiliar. "I'd like to meet with the board of directors, schedule it before 10 a.m. My name is Beckett, Lily Beckett." 10 minutes later, I was escorted to the top floor, the one my father used to forbid me from setting foot on when I was still just a dreamy and useless girl. The mahogany doors opened to reveal a vast boardroom with a long table, leather chairs, and walls lined with portraits of past Langston chairmen. I recognized my grandfather's eyes in the highest-hung painting. The same eyes that used to send chills down my spine every time I passed by. One by one, the board members shuffled in. Their faces were tense, uneasy. They all knew. Rumors about Beacon Holdings acquiring shares had spread since last week. But no one knew who was behind Beacon. And then, my father walked in. He looked noticeably older, more gray hair, and the fire once blazing in his eyes now dulled by exhaustion. He looked at me, but didn't recognize me. He couldn't. I stood up. "Hello, Mr. Henry Langston, we meet again." He squinted, frozen in place for a few seconds, then slowly stepped toward me. "Lily?" I nodded and calmly sat down in the chair at the head of the table. "It's been a while, hasn't it? Since the day you threw me out of your house with $110 and the words, 'That's all you're worth.'" The room fell silent. A few board members began to stammer. Mr. Peterson, my father's longtime associate, dropped his pen upon hearing my name. "No way," someone whispered. I opened my leather briefcase, pulled out a report and handed it to the secretary. Beacon Holdings currently owns 43% of Langston Capital's shares and controls 61% of its corporate debt. With the board unable to meet its short-term loan obligations, we have the right to assume full operational control. My father stood still, trying to keep his voice calm. "You can't do this. This is a family company. It's blood, it's legacy." I tilted my head. "Legacy? Where were you when your only daughter was thrown out on the street, living in a coffee shop storage room and knocking on every lab door just to chase her dream? You think you have the right to talk about family?" He stepped closer, voice trembling. "Lily, I was wrong." I didn't answer. I just looked him straight in the eye. "I didn't come back today to hear apologies. I came back to reclaim what you once said I could never build without the Langston name. Well, now you see, I did it. And more." I stood, placing my hand on the wooden table where he used to yell at me throughout my childhood. "Welcome to the era where Lily Beckett runs the game." The air in the boardroom thickened, as if someone had locked all the doors and thrown away the keys. The once proud faces were now lowered toward the documents I had just distributed. On those pages was the truth they didn't want to face. I held 45% of Langston Capital's shares, and worse, I also controlled over 70% of the debt hanging over their heads. I stood, every word landing sharp and clear like a hammer striking steel. There are only 2 options. 1. Langston Capital merges into Beacon Holdings, becoming a subsidiary of Astrovolt. 2. I call the debt immediately and this company collapses within 72 hours. No one spoke. All eyes turned to my father. Henry Langston. The man who once claimed I'd never amount to anything without the Langston name attached. He exhaled sharply, face pale, hands bracing against the edge of the table like he was trying to keep from collapsing. "This is revenge, isn't it?" he growled. "You came back to destroy what your father built over decades?" I laughed. "Wrong. I came back to fix your mistakes. By tearing down the rotting legacy you've clung to like a drowning man hugging a punctured float." He slammed his hand on the table, his voice screeching like metal against glass. "I'm the last Langston still in charge. I won't step down just because of a traitor daughter." "No," I replied coldly. "You'll step down because you let this corporation spiral toward bankruptcy, and I'm the only one holding out a hand to save it." I opened my laptop, projecting a detailed financial breakdown. Every loan, every due date, every SEC warning about liquidity risks he had chosen to ignore. Numbers don't lie. They're raw, cold, and have no room for ego. "If you don't sign the transfer papers today," I said slowly, "Beacon Holdings will exercise creditor rights and file for Langston Capital's bankruptcy." A soft scraping sound broke the silence. My father's chair slid back. He stood up, slowly, as if the weight of 30 years of delusion had just come crashing down on him. "So you really did it? Without me? Without your mother? Without the Langston name?" "Oh." I didn't respond. I just looked him in the eye, for the first time, without fear. He glanced around the room, then paused at the portrait of my grandfather hanging behind the chairman's chair. The same seat he occupied when he threw $110 in my face and called it all I was worth. "Lily," he said softly, like a confession never meant to be spoken aloud. I held out the pen toward him. "Sign it, or you can watch yourself drag your entire legacy to the grave." A brief hesitation. Then the sound of pen on paper. Slow, but firm. He signed. I took the document back, folded it carefully and slipped it into my leather bag, as if it weren't just a legal agreement, but living proof of a journey no one believed I could complete. A few board members stood up and began clapping, not out of joy, but because they knew they had just witnessed the end of a dynasty and the beginning of a new name. I walked to the chairman's seat, the chair that once symbolized power and pride in my family. I didn't sit. I just placed a hand on it, eyes locked on my father. "You once said I was only worth $100, so now ask yourself, how much did you lose trying to stop me from becoming who I am?" He turned his face away, said nothing. He didn't need to. I left that room without looking back, because for the first time in my life, I knew I no longer needed anyone's approval to prove my worth. The Langston building still stood, as a relic of decay. But I didn't return to live in the past. I came back to rebuild, from the wreckage my own family left behind. I took over Langston Capital not to burn it to the ground, but to uproot the rot my father left, and replant a healthier ecosystem from scratch. Within 6 months I fired the entire old executive board. People who lived off reputation and added no value beyond pointless meetings. But I kept almost all the middle and lower level staff, the ones who had quietly carried the workload, while the leaders counted money and shifted blame. I renamed the company Lunaris Impact Group and shifted the entire investment portfolio to renewable energy, clean tech, and sustainable development startups. The remnants of the old Langston were discarded without hesitation, not out of hatred, but because I knew, to build something new, you have to be willing to dismantle the old. The media called me the legacy breaker building the future. I didn't deny it. My mother, Evelyn Langston, called me no less than 10 times. She sent handwritten letters, emails, even her assistant to the office asking for a meeting. The letters were drenched in lavender-scented guilt, written in flowery language. "I just want to understand you better. I didn't think it would go this far. We're still family after all." I replied only once, with a 3-line email. "Some bridges are meant to burn. If you want peace, start by not trying to fix what you deliberately ignored." Lily Beckett. I was no longer her daughter. 1 year after the merger was finalized, I received a package. No sender's name, but the handwriting struck me like a knock from the past. Inside was a small envelope. I opened it and found a single $100 bill, laminated, pristine to the point of lifelessness. Along with it was a note, handwritten with a shaky hand. "You are worth more than I ever thought. H." I held the bill in my hands for a long time, then folded it. No tears. No smile. Just a strange emptiness, like I had finally received the validation I no longer needed. That evening I flew back to Palo Alto. Emma was still at Astrovault, now the chief operating officer, managing over 600 employees across 3 countries. But we still kept our old ritual. Once a month we returned to Willow Beans, the coffee shop where it all began. It was no longer the quiet place it used to be. Now it was busy, freshly painted, and had a small sign hanging behind the counter. The birthplace of a new energy ecosystem. I handed the $100 bill to the new shop owner, a young student with eyes full of ambition, and said, "Put it toward a scholarship fund for the part-time staff here. Maybe someone will need a launch pad, like I once did." He looked at the bill, surprised. "Is this real money?" I nodded, smiling softly. "Very real. And maybe worth more than any other $100 bill in the world." He folded the bill carefully, eyes glowing. I turned to look at Emma. The one who had witnessed every stumble, every sleepless night, every moment I nearly collapsed, and gave her a gentle nod. "At the end of the day," I said, holding my warm cup of coffee, "I didn't need revenge. I just needed to prove that I built something they once thought I never could." Emma nodded, speaking softly. "And what you built, no one can ever take away. I don't know where I'll go next. Maybe the next product. Maybe a venture fund supporting young female founders. Or maybe just a few years of peace, after a decade of non-stop running. But I know one thing for sure. A person's true worth doesn't lie in where they were born. It doesn't lie in their last name, inheritance, or the validation of others. It lies in what they dare to build from nothing, and what they refuse to let go of, even when the world once looked down on them. I'm no longer Lily Langston. I'm Lily Beckett. And I created my own worth, from the ashes they left behind. Lily Beckett's story is a powerful reminder that where you come from does not determine your value. Dismissed, abandoned, and stripped of all privilege, she built an empire from nothing. Not through bitter revenge, but through intellect, perseverance, and belief in herself, Lily turned rejection into a driving force for success. In real life, this reminds us, no one has the right to define you, except you, and true worth lies in what you dare to build and relentlessly protect. What do you think about Lily's journey and the choices she made? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel to keep discovering heartfelt stories and meaningful lessons from family and life.